Welcome to the channel. If you hadn't had an opportunity, please subscribe. What am I here to show you today? I have been working on a Raven Rattle on the channel for the last few months. I don't really speak traditionally in my videos, mostly because I do not like hearing my own voice. But I think having a little explanation of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, how I got here might be interesting to a wider community out there. So what am I here to show you today? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Raven Rattles, what they are to those that don't know about them, history of rattles, my personal history of carving, this rattle and where I got started, explaining the top of the rattle, the bottom of the rattle, the general process of how you carve objects like this, how I approached this carving, how I did all the fine detail, and the process of initially painting it. This rattle is not complete yet, but I thought it is in a very fine point to speak to all of those topics. So let's start out. A Raven Rattle. What is it? What's its history? Raven Rattles were originally carved by the natives of Alaska and Southeast Alaska. The Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian, and surrounding tribes often would carve them for their chiefs. Their sort of ruling class would use them as items of prestige. At times, they were used by the shaman of the tribes in maybe different forms, but this Raven Rattle specifically was mimicked off some of the Raven Rattles of old, or I attempted to do such. So, how I got here. I personally have been carving maybe 8 or 9 years. I guess it depends on if you count the whittling and things that I did as a child. As I grew older, I really explored a bunch of different art forms, and ultimately I really liked the intersection of carving with wood, utilizing all the various tools. I'm kind of a gadget nerd, so I like to have all of those little objects and little tools that can sort of dig out little spaces like you see in here. This Raven Rattle specifically, and where I started on it, was I originally wanted to make a Raven Rattle again after carving for a number of years. I felt like I was at a point in my own carving journey that I could actually do it justice at this point. I mean, it's very intricate. It took me a lot of time to feel like I built up the skill sets that I could even approach something like this and understood what I was carving and how I should be carving it, so that I didn't disrespect the art form, as I am not an indigenous carver. I really sort of strive to think of myself as appreciating the culture and trying to do it justice. But at the same time, I recognize that culturally today, it's not the most accepted of situations to have a non-native carver carving objects such as this. So to that, I apologize, but I will continue to plow forward, as I am not interested in selling this art at this point in my life. I am just here to appreciate it and make objects in which I display in my own house. So, history of rattles, owned by chieftains, objects of prestige, have a little mysticism, they tell a story, but they all have a very similar structure. Bird pulling, often a tongue or potentially a toad or other objects out of another creature. The head of the bird might be turned around and facing the tail end of the rattle or the handle. The birds take all sort of shapes and sizes, as do the little creature and you know, inner creatures that they might carve in between these folks. but it always has a very similar structure of there being a creature in the back, creature in the middle sort of laying about it, and then the head of the overall bird in which they're sort of sitting on its wings. That's the top of the rattle. So again, this might be thought of as potentially a kingfisher. You know, again, the whole overall thing is a raven. So the front represents a raven, little kingfisher there. And the little man in the middle, I chose to represent as sort of a transforming bear figure. So the bear is almost transformed into a man, but still has the figures of ears and sort of flailing out face structure, not really representing a full human nose at this point. On the bottom of these raven rattles, they often have some sort of creature that is sort of stylized in a bunch of what they call form line. I have a very light representation of form line, as I don't really feel I'm very skilled at it at this point, but often it represents a hawk of some sort. Not all of them are the same, but many, many, many have a little creature or man of some sort with this sort of hawk nose that connects up with the inside of the mouth. Around that basic similarity, a lot of variation. You have form line that sort of goes everywhere on the piece, sometimes has very blocky, very old representation of form line, and then, you know, again, runs the gamut all the way up to what you might imagine to be more modern form line, just covering the entire thing. Again, I did not do too deep a form line with mine. You know, I did as much as I felt like I could do it justice. The other, I guess, interesting parts that you'll see on these birds, and you can kind of see it represented with mine, is that how they connect the two parts together. Again, I did my best just trying to guess at how to put this thing together. Some have this sort of, you know, direct line that sort of splits the top and the bottom. Some of them try to incorporate more of the top down, and the handle actually connects only with the top, and the handle connects only with the bottom. You know, I looked at a bunch of different pictures on a lot of different catalogs and how they connect up with the little wing here. You know, sometimes it was tucked under there, so I couldn't really see how it was put together. And on the inside, it was just pure guesses, because I don't think I saw any representation where they actually had it open, so you could see how the inside was put together. One thing I did notice with a lot of them that were very similar to the way I structured it was there was this sort of gap that showed itself on a lot of them, and I thought, man, I don't know what they were doing. It looked kind of shoddy to me, and I thought, man, why did they have so many gaps? And then when I did it, I planed these two, the top and the bottom, dead flat. I connected the two. I put little posts on either side of the front, and I bound the bottom, thinking that would hold everything together and to allow it to dry without having too much misshapen around it. I actually bound the entire thing with surgical tubing that would sort of force the top and the bottom to be together. And honestly, when wood dries, it is so strong. It forces this little bowl shape to really squeeze in, and it actually bends along the grain as it shrinks. It caused a little crack to form on both the top and the bottom as those two pieces sort of diverged from one another. It's okay, I did as much as I could to sort of stabilize that diversion, and with it only made it look more authentic with this gap here and just a small gap on the other side. Other things to note is it was very interesting. Maybe I'll go into sort of the specific approach I did on all of it. So I did not know what I was doing at first. I went to an open carving class with a teacher I had gone to many times in the past, a guy named Scott Jensen. He too is a non-native carver, fairly respected within the community. He is an adopted Tlingit tribe member and has done an absolute ton of different carvings over years and years and years. Probably, I want to say 45, maybe 50 years he's been carving. I can't remember as I'm not him, but he is an older gentleman and has been carving. He's just such a great guy. So he offers an open class on occasion, and so I brought in a very basically shaped object that sort of went around the edge or the profile of the entire bird. I took in only kind of the top, and I did what I could possibly do over the top as best I could sort of guess. So, you know, cutting around the edge and then cutting a little bit down this profile on the top. And then I asked him, well, what is the approach? And he goes, well, you need to get that little guy, you know, carved all the way out. And I thought, okay, you know, he goes, everything is based on the little guy, and his proportions dictate the proportions of the other pieces. I had a really good drawing that I had made that had kind of the whole structure and how I wanted to put it together. So that really got me far ways along. You know, you really kind of want to put a plan together before you carve something this complex. Much like you're building a building, you got to know where everything's going to go. So the class was 3 days, and in that 3 days, I got through the basic shaping of this little guy. I did not really get down underneath or through any of these little pieces. It was really at its most basic shape of all of the major blocks. And even through that class, I asked multiple times, do I want to move to a different spot? Do I want to work on this or work on that? And he really highlighted the importance of going after the little guy and getting all of this carved out, because if you get along all of this other work and then realize you didn't leave yourself enough room or space, you would have to sort of junk the piece. It would be devastating, because just the amount of time that goes into this piece would be catastrophic. You probably never want to carve again. The top of this piece, I took, I want to say, about 8 or maybe even 9 months. I do not have a lot of time. I'm a hobbyist carver, so I spent, you know, what I could on the weekends, what I could on my, you know, off time after work. But for those 9 months, the top piece of this would often sit in a bucket of water. If you're not familiar with this process, most carving done in wood, outside of some specific cases, like cedar or basswood, a lot of the other types of hardwood need to be carved when it's wet. So part of the requirement of taking on this thing is I would have to keep this top piece wet for 9 months. And let me tell you, that in and of itself is an absolute challenge. You're fighting elements, you're fighting mildew, you're fighting water rotting on itself. You know, tannins are being extracted out of the wood, causing it to be discolored. It's really just kind of the wildest thing. If you're not really dedicated to a long-term investment, you really don't want to get into this as a hobby. But some techniques for taking that on are, you know, you can stick it in a plastic bag. That works on a short-term basis. You can put it in a plastic bag in a cold area. You buy yourself a little bit of time that way. You're talking weeks to maybe a month. If you're that fast, and you can do it that fast, a plastic bag is kind of okay. Then you can go from plastic bag to sticking the plastic bag in the fridge. The fridge will hold things off a little bit longer, but much like food, that wood will decay with time. So the fridge only lasts so long. I've heard of folks being able to successfully put it in the freezer. I have never really felt the freezer was the best avenue, mostly because just the nature of what freezing does to cells is sort of expanding and contracting. And so you're kind of tearing up, in my opinion, like it has to be on a, very low level, causing that wood to expand and contract like that. It's got to cause damage. Like, freezing never felt like the appropriate solution, but tons of people stick them in the freezer. It works fine. Probably just a bit of my own nut job in that case. I personally like submersion in water, so that seems to be the best way to stabilize wood for a very long period of time. So whenever I'm doing a carving that requires me to keep it wet, I definitely stick that object in water, and I actually use something else to push that, the carving down underneath the water line, so there's no part of the wood that is exposed to air, because that part of the wood that's exposed to air will dry. It might rot. It'll introduce a place in which things can get down into the wood. It's bad to have any exposure to air. Air is bad, water good. That's kind of the end all be all of it. So over that 9 months, the basic process is I need to carve everything out. I need to block it out in such a way that I can kind of visualize what I'm doing in a step-by-step sort of fashion. You want to carve out the major parts that you can get at easily, and as you sort of dig in on itself, you'll find that 2 spots will kind of meet, and then you can dig a little hole. You can stick a little object down there and carve that out, and then carve that out, and eventually all these pieces start exposing themselves. Once I got through the little man, the basic blocking, I did the same on the basic blocking of the head and the back, making sure the wings were really symmetric and flat. And I worked on the head and the front. Part of the complexity of this is not only all of the underneath and in between the little man stuff, but is in the mouth of both of these. You'll see that you can kind of go right through each one of them. In addition, the head is carved through the top this direction and exposed down through the bottom of the jaw on that side. So there's like one little spot down there where this opening connects up with that opening, and there's actually, if you have little light that's shown through, you probably see it sort of poking through on the other side there. Which is pretty cool, is just all of that little spaces, but it serves a functional purpose too. The less wide any portion of the wood is, the less chance of it bending and causing breakage, like I talked about earlier down here. You can prevent that with all of this hollowing out. So most of this is actually towards the interest in making sure every aspect of this is as hollow as it can possibly be. Probably the thickest thing on the entire piece is this little guy's head is fairly thick. He's probably a little over a ½ inch thick, maybe an inch, from nose to the back of the head. But that is all hollowed out all the way down, behind and underneath the head too. So down through the ears and underneath the guy, all the way down to the little spot back here is hollowed out. So pretty cool stuff. It was super complex to kind of make it through. It took absolutely forever. I'm not going to take the entire piece apart. I'll probably do that in the next video. But the inside is hollowed out, kind of a little bit like a spoon or a bowl would be on the inside, so that there's room for the little rattle to occur. So the bottom. One of the big intentions for me for the bottom after spending like 8 months on the top was, I got to get this bottom done. I need to get it done fast. The issue was, after spending 8 months on the top, I really realized that I actually had to do the bottom too, and they both had to be wet, and they both had to be drying concurrently. so that they kind of dried, and I could shape this so they actually almost would fit together at the very end of it. I knew, because I did 8 months on this, I did not want to spend 8 months on that. So I really spent the last 2 months really trying to go as fast as I could on this little face so I could get this piece done, because it has been such a long project and a long investment of time that I felt if I didn't get it done, you know, I'd be letting myself down. And if I didn't get done quickly, I really wouldn't have an opportunity to ever finish it, because the back would just sort of rot out or decay or dry in a way that I couldn't do the front. And just, ugh. So I really had to get this front done. So like I said earlier, they all have a very similar structure of a little hawk nose. Everything else, a lot of variation. You generally always have little eyes there. It usually looks like a little small mask of some sort, but a lot of variation on what's going on around it. I decided to put some little hands that sort of protruded out of the mouth. Again, that teacher Scott Jensen talked about different planes that really add a lot of interest to the any sort of pieces. When you have more planes and you have a lot of like shadow and differentiation, just adds excitement to what you're doing and a lot of visual interest. So from there, I sort of figured out what I wanted to do as far as the design. I really sort of knew that this line was such an unknown for me on the first round that I was really fearful of carving across the line, you know, joining some sort of piece of form line from the top to the bottom. I saw it done on a lot of different pieces, but I knew it'd be something was going to happen here that I was going to be happy with. They would not align in some sort of way, and I just felt like it had to get done in a way that I would be happy with the end result, or it just felt like it was going to be garbage. I just couldn't have it. I couldn't have it at all. The basic process for any mask is kind of different than what I approached on the top bit here. I did approach this little man's face the same way as I approached this guy's face, which is you start out with what's called faceting, which is making very symmetric edges to a block, such that you kind of pre-build all of the major planes that everything else will hang off of first. So there's like a plane here that comes just a little bit, a plane here that comes a fair distance. There's a small, tiny little plane that I usually put across the noses, the same plane that's over here, and then another plane over there. So you get this kind of, you know, basic curve. It already has a nose sort of built into it. And then in the same manner I kind of talked originally about this, is I do the profile of the face. I sort of dig out where the nose is, where the top of the nose is. That sort of informs where the slope of the brow will be, where the chin will be. And then you can make choices. Again, there was a little bit of dictation based on just historical work, what I was going to do with the nose and basically the eyes. I made little designs. I just again didn't know enough about form line that I felt like it could be really you know, exotic with it. So I put a couple little basic, what I think would be called a trigon, and the eyes, and I knew what I wanted to do with the nose, and you know where the nostrils are basically going to be. The complexity on the bottom, much like the top, is there's a little spot that goes underneath the nose and out the other side. So I had to figure out how to do that. I had little blocks projected out where the hands would be, but as you can kind of see, the fingers themselves are sort of halfway, halfway above that plane through the nose. So I just sort of really figure out how to kind of come in there on a swoop and dig that thing out without impacting any of the little block shape that was going to form the hands. once I kind of figured all that out, then I worked out the hands and how they would fit, you know, where the little fingers were and whether or not they'd be together or sort of splayed out. That all worked out okay. I, you know, bent in the lips in a way that, you know, gave it some fullness. This is an aspect that is not done yet. If you can really see down in there, is it's very, very rough down where the teeth are. And there's little spots where I left an unpainted lip relative to whatever paint I was going to do for the inside of the mouth, like a white or a, you know, some sort of teethy color, maybe black. I really don't know. So that part is one of the undone portions of this thing that still need to get painted. But that all, you know, eventually kind of worked itself out. Your next step, once you do, you know, on this particular piece, you know, top, then bottom, carved out the insides, got everything shaped up. Then I did that drying process. The drying was just a challenge because I, you know, daily would look at it and this little split would get bigger or bigger. And I'd try harder and harder to squeeze that wood down, putting more and more pressure on it, which I thought at some point was going to impact, you know, this little piece structural integrity because it was like a pinch point. So I tried to, you know, wrap that surgical tube around the strongest portions of the piece and really force that thing down. But I'm telling you, it was so strong. I mean, there had to be so much pressure in there as it's drying. Is it perfect? It's not perfect. Do I care too much? I don't care too much because for those that put this half split line in, almost all of them had a little split there that I couldn't understand how it got there, and now I do. There has to be a trick that I have to go look at more historical pieces to understand how you would make a different choice about where you put those pieces and how that would fix this problem. My guess is one of the easier ways of doing this is to have probably the handle on the bottom half and you're fitting most of that right underneath this curve, and you would leave yourself a lot of room to kind of sand it down till after it's dry, till it fit just right. I only could do so much of that without losing too much wood before I met this little carved line that I already put in it when it was wet. So I really only had so much room I could squeeze off there to flatten it up. So it really is okay on one side and it's really pronounced on the other side. But honestly, it can hold the little sound mechanism in there and I am okay with that. So what are some of the next steps that are missing? This handle is not in its final state. The rope on it right now is a cordage cedar bark. So I took cedar bark and I just did, I don't know what the technical term is, but it's sort of a twisted wrapping that you put on two twines that are connected to one another. You know, one twine in which is bent across, and then you wrap them up and they sort of bind upon themselves. And if you keep that tight, the whole structure will sort of automatically wrap upon itself. It's not really a braid per se, but you know, I think it's traditionally called cordage. And so I took that cordage, you know, I made enough that I could wrap around it. So it would just kind of hold its structure. I could kind of finish the little stand I made for it. And I could kind of visualize the final result and where I wanted to take that final result. And so what I know I want to do is, instead of this cordage, I want to use another traditional binding method, which is called spruce root. So I'm going to go find some spruce root that I can harvest in a, you know, a sustainable sort of way, legal. And And I'll bind it up with spruce root, and then when that spruce root dries, it'll sort of bind all this together. When I do that binding, I'll take it all apart and I'll do a little video and show you what the inside looks like. There's a lot of kind of interesting parts I won't reveal at this point, but the inside has some things that I use to mitigate some of the spreading and cracking that was happening as it was drying. One last thing before I let y'all go, that is the piece, and with it I made a little stand. So that's a stand. It would go inside there, and then it would lean upon itself in sort of kind of a hanging fashion. So you can kind of see the display and sort of the profile view there. I don't know if this will be the final thing that I keep, but it, again, served a purpose to kind of visualize what this thing is going to look like. The final parts that I really need to finish to consider it kind of a full and complete piece is to actually try to antique it a bit. Take the whole painted structure and kind of beat it up a little bit. It looks too crisp and clean when you freshly paint a piece, so you want to sort of rough off the edges that would traditionally kind of just get bounced around and banged on a little bit. It helps to sort of tell the story of the piece, to give it a little bit of a antiquing, and then from there I will seal it up with something like a tung oil to keep the paint in, you know, a state that I want it to look like, and not let it lose any more through kind of getting more beat up than it really wants to be. When I get to that step, I might do a video, might not do a video. It's one of the more secretive aspects of making these, is to have the antiquing that is kind of original to you. So that's why I didn't do a video of the painting, but overall I am happy with the end result. So thank you all. If you have a chance, smash that subscribe button and give me some likes. I could use them. And thank you for punishing yourself through the last 20 minutes or so watching this video. Hope you actually enjoyed yourself, learned a little bit about what a Raven Rattle is, and got to hear a little bit about my journey and process in making this one. So thank you for hanging out. Have a great one. Talk to you later.